Well, have I got a show for you? Because I'm so excited. The Tree Lady Talks community is so excited because we're here today to talk about something that is potentially planet saving. The free 30 300 rule. How it started, where it's going, and is it really making a difference? So I'm here with Cecil Konijnendijk and Dirk Voets. So Cecil, tell us a bit about yourself, please.
Hi Sharon, great to see you. Thanks for having us on the show today. So yeah, my name is Cecil and I'm co-directing the Nature-Based Solutions Institute, and we are a small think tank for the evidence-based greening of cities across the world. And I've also held various academic positions over time as a teacher and researcher.
Excellent. And Dirk,
Yeah, so my name is Dirk Voets, and I work for a company called Cobra, also based in the Netherlands, just like Cecil. We're into big green data. We try to map the world and make it slightly greener than it used to be all the time.
brilliant. So Cecil, take us for a walk through a city in 2060 where the world had just pushed nature away.
Oh, that would be a very grim image, I would say, Sharon. So you would be in your heavily air-conditioned house, if you're lucky, because there have been a lot of problems with lack of electricity during parts of the day because the power net is so much overburdened. But you have a little of air conditioning, and then you step outside of your house, and it's sweltering hot. It's almost unbearable. You can really only be outside for a few minutes. You walk to the bus stop where the drone bus will come and pick you up, but you can actually not be there. There's no shade. You don't see any other people. Nobody's walking their dogs. Dog walking is no longer there. People don't have dogs anymore, and you just hope that in one way you'll see something green, something nature. But to do that, you have to go to AI. You have to go to a virtual universe where images of nature are shown. So definitely not a place I would like to live in 2060.
Will it have a profound impact on human health, let alone the absolute crisis for our planet? That's really, really grim. So, for those who don't know, what is the 3-30-300 rule and when did you come up with the idea, Cecil?
Yeah, so in February 2021, during the second wave, I think it was, of the COVID pandemic, maybe the third wave, I came across some research that showed the strong link between canopy cover on the one hand and a range of health and climate benefits on the other. And it turns out that if you get up to a level of about 30%, maybe even more canopy cover, that you see really that these benefits are getting stronger and stronger. And then I combined that with, so 30% canopy cover with 300 meters to the nearest high quality public green space. And that is actually not me who came up with that, but that's the World Health Organization, who already have had that guideline for a few years. And then I was thinking 30% canopy at the neighborhood level to have a city average, right? 300 meters to the nearest park. Then we should also have something for visual green, especially during the COVID pandemic. Being able to see trees or green from your window was really important for our mental well-being. So I added to the 300 another the three trees from your window. And these should really be larger sized mature trees, as we know that these trees do most for cooling, but also for mental health. So yeah, so it became this nice iteration of 330, 300, visual green, surrounding green, and recreational green.
So, in just 3 years, this idea that based on your own research and putting together different strands of thinking has really gained international traction, like nothing I have ever heard before in my quite long career. So that's absolutely incredible. But I know, because by the way, listeners, we know each other here. So I had the pleasure of being with these guys in Croatia recently. And Dirk, you spoke there about how you actually work this out. So, first of all, what scientific methodology do you use to calculate free trees from your window? I mean, you can't go to everybody's house, can you, and say, Oi,
I would have the best job in the world if I was allowed to do that, but yeah, no, my boss will not allow me to do such a thing. So now we use satellite images for that. We use either aerial photography or satellite images, depending on what's available. and especially for creating global images. Yes, we use satellite images. These satellite images provide us with information about trees, houses, and so we can distinguish the connection between the two. And well, scientific, that's a big word, honestly, but what we measure is the number of significant trees within 25 meters of each and every building on the planet. The reason for this 25 meters is because it's at that distance that you can still see individual leaves. You see them rattling in the wind and everything. So all the let's say all the benefits to the human body still exist. Obviously, if it's further away, it will be a green blur, but at 25 meters, you can still see the individual leaves and see the fractal structures that build up the tree. And then I suppose that optimizes the benefits that you get from it. So yeah, 25 meters from each and every building. If we count 3 significant trees within that, you pass the score. But we do count the actual number of trees. So if it's only 2 trees, then we do recognize that and mark it as 2 trees. So it's not perfect, but it's still quite okay.
Oh, it sounds brilliant. And what about the 30% canopy cover? What tools do you use?
Yeah, yet again, satellite images. So we've been talking with Cecil quite a bit about that. We wanted this neighborhood level, and what constitutes a neighborhood level? What are we talking about? Because in each and every country, that has a different meaning. But with Cecil, we sat together and tried a few different types of sizes, and then we came up with, we basically draw a circle of 500 meters radius, so 1 kilometer in diameter. Around each and every building, we count the canopy cover within that circle. We also count the land area within that circle, because if there's water, then it's rather unfair to count that as well. You can't plant trees on water. So we count the land area within that circle, and if we divide those two, then we'll get a percentage. And if that percentage reaches 30%, then and if it's not 30%, we'll measure the actual percentage. So you'll know how big your gap is. So you'll know if it's 27%, you only need to plant 3 extra percent to reach it.
So when we're talking
And of course, sorry, to add to, I do apologize, but we do it for every single individual building. So yeah, we do that circle trick, and then we move one building, do it again, and move one building and do it again. And we do that for the whole planet.
Oh, well, that sounds like quite a long task.
It's there's no magic except in how do we get this scalable. But yeah, there's no magic other than that.
Gosh, it sounds enormous. When we're talking about canopy cover, listeners, we are talking about the view top down. So we're talking about combined canopies of trees. So we're not talking about numbers of trees here. And it just speaks to how important our large canopy trees are in terms of the ecosystem services that they provide. So the final one, 300, how do you measure that?
Yeah, that's a hard one. Actually, that was the most difficult one for us. Because what constitutes a park? Or it's not really a park, right? Cecil, it's more like a high-class urban green space. I think your definition is high-class urban green space.
Yeah.
What on earth is that? So we had long discussions about looking at pictures and saying, okay, so would this constitute as a high-class urban green space? Ultimately, we came up with an algorithm yet again based on remote sensing, on satellite images that predicts if something is a park or not, and then we subtract certain areas which clearly are not a park. And to give you an example, an airport is normally very grassy. If you wouldn't look twice, you would think it might be a park, but obviously it's not. So we subtract it from all the parks. And then what we also do is we add the obvious parks. Sometimes in databases, parks are marked as parks, and not necessarily as parking, but as park. So we do add them to our database, and then we end up with, well, all the parks in the world, basically. And what we then do is we overlap it with streets. We'll find all the entry points to these parks. And then we'll start counting from these entry points over the road to each and every building on the planet to see if it is within 300 meters over the road. I think we'll stop searching after 600 meters, and then we're done. But up to then, we'll actually mark the actual number of meters to walk towards that park entrance.
And so from that, you get this amazing array of maps. And listeners, can I remind you to be watchers and head over to our Tree Lady Talks YouTube channel. And this is a film also. And so we are going to be overlaying these beautiful, because they are beautiful images of various cities, London, Manchester, Tokyo, Amsterdam, to name but a few. So that you can see these images as we're talking, and then you combine these images as well. So, I mean, how many of these areas have you carried out the survey? How many cities have you done in the world?
Well, we've mapped the whole planet. I could technically say to you every single one, but of course I haven't done any additional analysis on it. Like I haven't compared Buenos Aires with Pyongyang or something like that. But yeah, basically every single building on the planet has been mapped like this.
And so have you been working with any partners, any software partners to do this work?
No, we don't. Well, yes and no, as in for the generation of this data, we don't use any software partners. But of course, once you have this data, it's quite interesting to combine that with other information about, for instance, the trees that you're managing. And for instance, especially in the UK, we work together with Woodland Dwelling. They have a lot of information. They are a software partner in the sense they generate, or they don't generate, but they provide software for managing your trees. And of course, where should I plant new trees? Well, the 330-300 rule is fantastic as a basis, as a foundation layer to define where you should plant your extra trees. So yeah, Woodland Dwelling in the UK will be a good partner to work with for stuff like this.
And that's with Russell Horsey, friend of the show.
That's Russell Horsey, yes, exactly.
And more from him later on. But I love the fact that on your website you talk about mapping the livability of the planet together. Really love that. That's fantastic. So you've got all this data, and it's so powerful to know what we have. Because how can we plan without understanding our baseline? But first of all, out of the work that you've looked at in more detail or been commissioned to do, how are people doing? So let's say about 60% of our listeners are in the UK. How are the UK cities doing in terms of already complying to this rule? Let's take Manchester, for example.
That's a very good question. I don't necessarily work together with the city of Manchester, so I don't know exactly how they apply it. But what we do see a lot is so let's start off with Manchester's extremely livable. If we look at the UK cities, then Manchester's really doing quite well. They score very high on both the 3, the 30, and the 300. It's really a lovely city to live in, I would assume. But so how would they apply data like this to make the right decisions? Well, there's different ways to go about this, and actually Cecil could probably tell you more about that than I do. What we do see, very concrete. Let's say the 300 rule. If you can't reach a park within 300 meters, what do? Well, you can build a new park, obviously, but that's very expensive and very space consuming. So you can't always do that. We're quite aware of that. Very often it's just as simple as just opening up an extra entrance point into a park, or just building a small bridge so that people can actually reach it within 300 meters instead of walking around the whole way. It's quite easy to open up more people to a park by very simple measures. So that's a very concrete way how a city like Manchester could even become better than it already is, because it's really performing quite well.
And I know that in London, certainly in Islington, there's a project where they're taking old cul-de-sacs and small parking areas and making those into little pocket parks as well. So I wonder, those small green spaces are also play spaces, play on the way is really great for people's lives, isn't it? Well, thank you for that. But Cecil, this is so important. How are you and others sharing this information to decision makers, and it's sort of inspiring the general public? How are you giving out those? You clearly are.
Yeah, there's a lot of attention, I would say, for 330-300 ever since it was launched. It has been picked up by social media influencers, by journalists, by also politicians for sure. So that has made my work a little bit easier. So I didn't really have to push too hard for it. Although what I do now is I try to do a lot of talks and webinars and so for audiences that are non-green audiences. So the planners, the economists, the architects, the civil engineers, the politicians, to really try to get the message out. And there I really find the reception is really good, because a lot of those professions have asked us green people for many years to give some better indications, some better guidelines. And of course we know about all the benefits, but we have been a little bit fluffy, you could say, about how many trees do we need, or how much park space do we need, or what is the distance. And of course, there's an element of subjectivity to it, but I think the research has gone so far that we can actually say a lot about some of those principles, like we need canopy cover, we need a nearby park, and we need to see trees and green around us. So based on that, I think it fulfills a need, and that also probably explains why it has become so popular and so widely published about.
That's absolutely brilliant. So can we talk about the impact of it and the work that you do, Cecil, in particular, on the international platform, and how you're influencing think tanks and international organizations?
Yeah, so that's the really nice thing, right? So on the one hand, we have had cities that are working with this, and there's hundreds, if not already thousands of cities now using it. But actually it has gone to the level of nations, countries, like Belgium is now using it as a national norm. But then also international organizations. I just heard, as we are recording this, that the United Nations Forum for Mayors that had a meeting today in Geneva actually gave attention to the 330-300 rule as a possible tool. So it shows that even the UN, different parts of the UN are now considering it as something to recommend, to work with, which is very exciting.
That's really super exciting, because in the last few years, well, decades, and particularly in the last few years, it's about, we're going to plant 1 million trees. It's never, we're going to maintain 1 million trees. It's never, we're going to look after the 1 million trees we already have. It's always like a sexy number that wins votes. But if that is finally going to change to something a lot more meaningful in people's lives, that's brilliant. What about on the nation, your work with individual nations?
Yeah, so I think a great example of that is Belgium, where they first of all looked at the rule, or looked at and said, okay, is there really something to it? So they had an independent study done by the Catholic University of Leuven, who said, well, actually, there's a lot to be said for this. It makes sense. It's based on the latest research. Maybe it's 28% and maybe it's 400 meters, but 330-300 is good. And then actually the minister, national minister for environment, said that we're going to use this as a new green norm in Belgium. They needed a new kind of steering tool. And interesting enough, it was not only the green department, the environmental department, but the health department said the same, and said we're going to use it for combining climate health principles. And that actually was really nicely supported also by a wave from the medical sector in Belgium that actually called for 330-300 medical doctors, the medical insurance companies. So it kind of all came together to this extent that today, 1st of October, as we are recording, they had a national campaign in Belgium where they actually presented the data. They said, where do we need more green, in which cities in Belgium? So it's really blown up quite rapidly there.
That's so exciting. And so, as you say, we are recording this on Tuesday, the 1st of October. Well, on Friday this week, I'm going to take a day out to go to the NHS Forest Conference in the UK. A national conference where we're talking about trees as part of clinical care and about managing the NHS forests, because there's lots of hospitals have a lot of green space. And my own experience of managing a hospital woodland for 10 years was when I first started, and I spoke to the clinicians and the managers. I said, well, I'm going to help you manage these woodlands for people and for biodiversity. They said, what woodlands? It was a lack of awareness on their external space. So that's so encouraging. And I wonder also, on a sort of neighbourhood level, where this idea, has it trickled down into perhaps non-tree professionals' consciousness, and how do you have an example of that?
Yeah, I think the best examples I can probably mention is on the one hand from the professional side, that I see a lot of interest from architects and planners and engineers. So the people that are dealing with green, but it's not maybe their core aspect. And especially architects have really been eager to say, hey, this is something we want to embrace. Developers. So, for example, here in the Netherlands, quite a few developers are now putting it into their package of tools to develop new neighborhoods, which is really encouraging. But also residents. So you see groups of residents now using this as a tool to, as they say, call for environmental and climate justice in their street or neighborhood. So groups in Brussels that are using it to go to the politicians. There's a lot of both bottom-up and top-down initiatives, I think, happening there.
That's great. And I did hear about a group of folks in Mount Pleasant near Perth.
Yeah, that's right. And they actually allegedly had been arguing for a new park in their neighborhood for many, many years. And then when 330-300 came, they used it to go to the politicians. And then they managed to get much further, to the extent that the decision for a new park seems to have been taken, and initiatives towards that new park are also on the way, which is really encouraging, of course, that we actually see physical changes in the landscape based on 330-300.
I love that. And hello, Australia. I know you listen. But time we did something else in Australia. But this is all very positive, isn't it? And I wonder if some politicians have been saying, oh, yeah, I like this. This is the latest thing, as I alluded to earlier. But have you experienced some nations or municipalities giving this, what we call in the UK, lip service? In other words, they say, oh, yes, we're going to do this, and nothing changes.
Yeah, for sure, that happens, right? So there were some very early adopters that immediately started playing with the numbers and started saying, well, 30% canopy, that let's call it 30% cool space or vegetation. But I've also seen that politicians are held accountable. I saw by coincidence the story of Athens in Greece, where the mayor ran a campaign partly based on 330-300, got elected. And then 6 months later, the media were full of people saying, hey, where's 330-300, right? How are you implementing it? So I think it's, on the one hand, of course, a nice thing for politicians to use, but it's also easy to hold them accountable, because you can measure with Dirk's data and mapping, like, what is the progress? What is the expectation? What is the scenario? So it's easy to promise, but delivery is also really monitored very well.
Yeah. And I wonder if you've had any outright pushback, any hostility, any negativity to do with this movement, because let's face it, everybody has a right to an opinion.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the main pushback has come partly from our own professions. I think people that feel like, okay, this is the flavor of the month, right? This is going to be hard to deliver. We have to focus on other things. And partly it has come from, for example, from the developers who say, okay, this is too much green. This is not realistic. But I always say, I mean, cities are changing. We are in a climate crisis, a health crisis, biodiversity crisis. So we have to think differently. And we also have to really think that this is for me, it's also a door opener, a tool to get trees and green on the agenda, to get a discussion going about the large trees, right, that you mentioned, or how to grow trees underground, above ground, how to create high quality green spaces. So I think more than anything else, actually, it puts green and trees on the agenda. And from there on, of course, we need all the professionals to make sure we also deliver on the longer term and maintain, etc.
Yes, that's right. It starts a conversation, doesn't it? Even if you don't get there all the way. Well, that's great. So, you've talked about Belgium. So, how have Belgium started to make this change? Has it started with policy or with practice or at the same time?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of, on the one hand, I think an interest by government, especially the Flemish regional government, that was really looking for better tools to plan green for health and climate. Then I think it's the knowledge institutions like universities that have been picking this up, but also the NGOs, like, for example, Greenpeace has been very active in this domain. We see similar things in the Netherlands with organizations like IVN, the Institute for Nature Education, etc. So I think it's often this kind of collaboration of different actors that come together and see their needs merge. So a bit of pushing from the NGOs and the residents, policy initiatives, the research that supports it. And I think that's a model that I've seen in a few countries.
Excellent. So, thinking about this a bit deeper, so Noel and I don't go on holiday very often, poor old Noel. But the last one we had was a year and a half ago, and we went to Florence in a city break, and we loved it. And one of the things we love about Florence was obviously the architecture, the special uniqueness of place, all the artwork, obviously, pasta. But it is a city that on the middle, where most of the tourists are, it's not very green. And because of the historic nature of it, that we prize, that people go there because it is that special place, it's very hard to see how this rule could and should apply. And I wonder what both of your thoughts are on the cultural sensitivities of the urban grain, as we might say, of the built form and sense of place. How might
Yeah, do you
this
want to
be
start, Dirk,
reflected?
to say something? Yeah.
Dirk, what are your thoughts on that? Big
I
question.
recognize what you say. Let's start with that. Of course, the three rule especially is quite hard to reach. Florence is the inner city. Florence is so well condensed that the trees from the outside still have a positive impact on the 30 rule, I suppose. But yeah, you're not going to plant any trees on the market, obviously. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard. Perhaps even impossible to reach, but I do think that is a fantastic starting point for a good discussion. I think it goes without saying that having 30% of canopy cover is really healthy. So even though it's not necessarily feasible all the time, it's still healthy. It's still something to aim for. And if you really can't, then I guess you should choose different methods to make the city greener. Perhaps you could use vertical green or other ways of green roofs, green headed. But at least you find the spots where you need to be really creative, and you also found the spots where you need to ask for a lot of subsidies or a lot of budget to solve a very complicated situation. I think it helps you to prove to the city council that, sorry guys, but this is going to be expensive, but we really need some money here, because this is a hard spot. It really is.
And I think
Yeah.
also, I mean, I'm going to refer back to Nadina Galley's excellent book a few podcasts ago, where she talked about, and you did earlier, Cecil, about the impact of just not having any green in our compact cities. And I think again of Florence. And I know this doesn't apply to the rule, but I mean, as you said there, Dirk, any sort of greening where it would be culturally inappropriate to move a building or plant a tree, and there simply isn't the room. But I mean, roof gardens maybe, vertical greening, plants in pots, etc. But Cecil, what are your thoughts on this? Has been done this is for the whole planet, and thank heavens we have huge diversity in cityscape and townscape. How might people not get hung up on this and create their own magic?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's very important. I always kind of stick to 330-300 as a starting point. And then, of course, as you move into a local context, you have to see, okay, what's realistic here? What's the cultural history? What is the community interest? What's the ecological background? And then you see, for example, in arid cities, right, in very dry cities, that 30% may be very high and maybe also, maybe less desirable. You have to work with local vegetation. But still, you can still make steps in the direction. You can still have the three components reflected. And a nice example, of course, of a city that is historic but is actually changing and doing this is Paris. So Paris decided to start planting forest on some of its historical areas. A lot of debate, right? Because sometimes it's a work of art or it's a square where trees were not designed in, but they still planted a lot of trees and say we need this because the city is getting warmer every year a little bit. The city was not designed for the weather that we're facing now and will face in 20, 30 years. So actually we have to develop. We're not freezing a city in time. It's a dynamic space, and I think that's very brave. And those discussions we also need to have, even with cultural history, and see, well, may there not be space still, right? To at least, maybe we can even enhance the cultural experience by planting trees or having other green.
I really love that because there are some things which are literally fixed in stone and need to be, but the beauty of our cities is that they do evolve with time, with changing needs. They've evolved for the blinking car, and they've evolved for transport. They've evolved for many, many different things and phases in history. So this is a new phase in history. So I love the fact that Paris are doing that and creating a new cultural identity through green space. So That's really interesting. Thank you for that. So I'm going to go to listeners' questions for a while. And I'm going to start with Suzanne Simmons, who is the Urban Forest Director at Trees for Cities. She asks, can you ask Cecil and Dirk how and where we can quantify the deliverables collectively? So we've talked about how you can measure, but how are we studying what's being done? And I know it's only 3 years old, but what are your thoughts on how we can show how this can work?
Cecil, one for you?
Yeah, I can start, Dirk, and then I mean, of course, it's really great that we have the maps, right? We have the assessments that Cobra has been doing, so we can actually see what is the current state. Then you can see how that develops over time, and actually, we have the research, we have the tools to then link that to ecosystem services, so we can actually even do a prognosis. Say, okay, in 20, 30 years from now, how does 330-200 look then, and what does that mean for things like stormwater regulation, carbon sequestration, air pollution reduction, cooling, but also things like health. We know the impact of bringing a park closer to people for health. So we're getting more and more fine data to actually be able to monitor that. Even economic benefits, studies that are looking at the presence of green in neighborhoods and linking that to a healthcare cost, for example. So I think we can actually, I see that as a next step now, that probably cities are going to do that. Cities like Malmö that have been really well ahead are already monitoring very carefully what kind of benefits they're going to get by implementing 330-300.
Yes, because the iTree Eco enables a wonderful measurement of ecosystem service provision, and then all the work that Tree Economics, and I know that you're a partner and ambassador for them, Cecil, really looking at that data and overlaying it with social, economic and health data to create these fantastic maps of where are there gaps in, let's say, tree canopy. How does that look in terms of social inequality? I mean, often, but not always, there's a relationship between fewer trees and lower wealth and poorer health. It's not as simple as that. So I think that this wonderful sort of era of being able to source data on a landscape scale to inform policy is hugely exciting.
Yeah,
So,
I know, for example, that Dirk, you're also doing like heat maps and so, right? To say, well, how are like heat islands developing? And you could link that easily to this as well.
You're very right. There's all these other things that you can combine with it. Urban heat islands are very, very common to combine with the 300 rule and come to extra insights, or the socioeconomic data that you can add to it. Flooding, there's all sorts of extra data sets that you can add to the mix and basically come to better insights on the livability of the landscape. Yeah, so true.
I mean, all this data is fantastic, but I sort of want to jump to Naomi and Naomi's search in a minute, but she always speaks powerfully for the community. So we're talking about literally almost looking down from the sky and being very clever with our tech, but it's not in people's hearts. In fact, I'll go now to her question. So this is Naomi Zurcher, who is the owner of Arbor Aegis. She's a urban forester based in Switzerland now. She's actually a friend of the show. She was on a few years ago. So here we go. The free 3300 concept is a nice generality, but how does it relate to the challenges for the practicing urban forester? It's one thing to plant the concept, it's quite another to actually grow each and every tree that exists or that we will plant well into maturity. Now that's a goal, and that's how you realize canopy and all those delicious ecosystem services. So I mean, I love that, delicious ecosystem services. So it's basically she's saying it's so challenging. How can we make sure trees thrive?
Yeah, I think I fully agree with Naomi, right? That the focus, of course, is on making sure that trees thrive in cities and that communities and trees are connected. My frustration has been over many, many years that this knowledge is not reflected sufficiently. And the reason for that, in my assessment, is that we have not been present at the table when big decisions have been taken, when prioritization has been done of land use, space use. So that's the reason for 330-300, to actually give us that space at the table, and from there on have the discussion that we need to have about how should trees be grown, how much space do they need, how do we connect trees and community. So it's exactly, I think, the points that Naomi makes that I want to support by putting something on the table that we have been lacking, in my opinion. We've had some very general green norms. We have had some focus on canopy, but by combining visual green, canopy, and recreational green of high quality, I think we can have a much more valuable discussion.
Dirk, do you have anything to add to that?
Apart from me agreeing to all what was said, what I see is a lot is that that it really helps the tree people, and they already know. They already know where things are wrong. They already know there's not that much for them in the 330-300 maps. Perhaps it's a reality check, but they already know. It's the bridge, or the bridge towards the people that do not know about trees. It's the bridge towards the public. It's the bridge towards journalists. It's the bridge towards the city council or the mayor, and being able to convince them, look, I'm sorry, but the map is red. We need to do something. We really need to. It's not an opinion. It's a fact. So I do think that it really helps the tree people to bring other things to the table and claim some budgets. But of course, afterwards, yes, you still have to do your profession. The 330-300 law is not going to tell you which tree is going to be where. That's your job, and you guys are good at it.
Yeah, draw down into the detail of making sure it's planted, sourced properly from a nursery, planted properly, cared for properly, and understood and maintained properly. And Naomi goes on to say, and this is her statement really rather than a question, is if trees are to be planted into a community, the community needs to be engaged in that decision-making process, starting with sharing what is a tree and how it grows. Informed communities as part of the planning process should be the guiding light. So have you found in places, let's take Malmo, for example, a place where I was privileged to walk around with a group of tree folk just under a year ago. How have the communities been involved in successful implementations of this movement?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and there's examples in Malmö and other cities where actually there's on the one hand the more formal planning processes where communities are involved in decisions affecting their living environments, but you also see more kind of bottom-up initiatives where communities take 330-300 and use it to argue for more green in their neighborhood, or they say, well, what we need is this or that. So I think it's an excellent tool actually that can be used also for public engagement. It's something we can all assemble around, we can all understand it. It gives us a wonderful opportunity to talk about the values of trees and nature. So one of the things I do a lot these days is actually to talk with communities, to give them very general lectures and talks about the importance of nature and green, but then to get back from them, like, where are the problems? Why are we not having so many trees in our gardens, for example? Or why are neighbors not embracing this? So I think that, again, it's a very good communication platform in that sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And this might be one for you, Dirk, actually, from Nadina Galley. She would love to hear both of your perspectives on the most promising technologies we can use to objectively quantify the free of the 330-300. And what size of tree from your window deems big enough?
Yeah. I was afraid you'd ask, honestly, because I saw you were asking the question. I thought, oh, gee. Yeah. So let's start with the last bit, because that's easy. We had long talks about what constitutes as a significant tree, because that's what Cecil says. It needs to be a significant tree. Small trees won't do. So where's the limit? Where do we cut it off? And we found some research, Dutch research on urban climates, and they claimed that a tree of roughly 7 meters diameter, I would say, it's 28 square meters of canopy cover per tree. That was significant. They claimed that was significant. We looked at it together, actually, Cecil, and we thought, that kind of makes sense. So if you see 3 trees of 28 square meters of canopy cover, you've got yourself 3 significant trees, and the rule is on. So that's that, and of course it's a hard line, but that's how indices work, I suppose.
A great answer. So another question from Cameron Gibson, who is a tree officer in the UK at Walsall Council. How do you think it will fit in with the current UK planning legislation? And do you think it could be enforced? It's difficult enough, he says, to retain and protect existing trees, let alone get replacements that will contribute to the 30% canopy coverage desired. And he's saying that most garden sizes of new builds these days are too small to get any big trees, and the landscape ends up being removed. I'm afraid that is the truth here in the UK. So, do you think it's something that could be enforced?
Well,
Would you
that's
like
a
to
key
hear a rule?
question. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, but that's the key question, right? So we have that debate in the Netherlands. The Belgians have it. The Swedes have it. Should we go to a system of norms, green space norms, like Germany had in the past, for example? And that debate is still on. I think to really make a difference, eventually we need to have something stronger than a rule of thumb, right? It needs to be more than a guideline. We should think about maybe integrating this with maybe principles like biodiversity net gain in the UK, or other tools that are measuring other things. So, but for health and climate adaptation, this could be a really good one to use. And I know also that a report was issued by a few organizations in the UK. I think it's called Greening Up, where they talk about norms for especially street and square like public landscapes, and they actually recommend 330-300 as a good metric, as a good potential norm as well. So I think we might have to move in that direction, but it's of course a tricky debate, right? Where how strict are we going to implement this?
I mean, Dirk, sorry, did you want to add to that? Because I was able to jump all over that answer.
No, I fully agree. So we see this a lot out here. Yeah, you already mentioned it basically, but the 30 rules, especially the 30 rules, sounds very strict, right? People are really, geez, we're never going to get that 30%. That's humongous. And then I have two answers to that. The first one is, well, it's not that humongous. Very often you do reach it. Don't get me wrong. Very often you do reach it. It's not out of reach very often. But yes, your example of these old towns. Yes, of course, sometimes it just can't be done. I guess a good thing is that you don't have to reach it right now. At least you know what your gap is right now. But then you have, let's say, the rest of your career to make sure that you reach the 30%. It doesn't have to be solved tomorrow, but at least you know your gap. At least you know where to go to. Science is on your side when you say every single percentage that I add helps.
Yes.
And 30 is the goal.
I think that's really good. And I just want to go back to the point you made, Cecil, about in the UK, biodiversity net gain, it is really changing things very, very quickly in terms of tree retention, often challenging and sometimes inappropriate tree retention. But you can hear more of that on a couple of episodes in Tree Lane Talks, with one with Julian Forbes-Laird and one with Simon Thomas on YouTube as well. So final question, Russell Horsey, as mentioned earlier, on woodland dwelling and tree clutter. We've kind of touched on this already. So we've talked about the uniqueness of some of our European cities and international cities. But he asked particularly about the 300 element of the rule to the minimum size of the park, because it can be really difficult to put in new parks without the demolition of buildings. And he really champions well-managed pocket parks in dense urban areas. So you kind of answered that already with perhaps another gate to a park or something, but any further thoughts on the size and the pocket parks, etc.?
Yeah, so the original WHO World Health Organization recommendation says 1 hectare minimum.
Yes.
To give space to different activities, variation, etc. I've already lowered that to 0.5 hectare, knowing of course that this could be hard to reach, and these smaller parks can be important. Actually, in Belgium they're looking at even smaller, so 0.2 hectares, where you really get into the pocket park aspect. So I do think like as we want to go to 30%, maybe we strive for 15 or 20 first. Similarly with the 300, we could say, well, actually if 0.51 hectare is not realistic, we start at least with smaller green spaces and start integrating those. But having said that, the original 330-300 asked for a larger, high quality green space, because those will actually have most values and most benefits.
Excellent. Joe?
Yeah, I kind of like the big parks. I guess everybody does. There's certain reasons why you do this, right? I mean, you're off to making sure that people interact with other people. There's a social component to it. You need to meet people in the park. You need to be able to do different types of exercises. You need to walk around and play football or whatever you want to do. You can't do that if it's just 10 square meters. It's impossible. It will never happen. So given the goal of the 300 rule, it needs to have a certain size. But yes, of course, I'm quite aware that's not always possible. That's quite obvious. Yeah. So it's a bit of a challenge, I suppose.
So really, so that's the listeners' questions. We love this feature. Thank you, Tree Ladies Talks community. We want to hear from you. This is your show by Noel and I, because we just love this community and we want to serve you. But going back to one of my questions, retrofitting. So a lot of this is going to be what we call putting nature back where it is at the moment. So I'm sure that many of our audience be aware of the technical challenges of that, with say underground services, etc. But what trends have you both observed in successful retrofitting of an existing city to help deliver this role?
Yeah, if I can start with that, two issues that I see is, of course, or actually three issues. One is mobility changes, so change in how much space we give to cars. So we see more shared car or car share schemes. We see more public transport, more biking, which actually means that some cities like Utrecht, where I'm based, are taking in a small percentage of the parking spaces every year and open it up to public space. So the second is, of course, new or redevelopment of housing. The average building is not more than 40 years old these days, so that means every 40 years we have to rebuild, and that gives opportunities, of course, to think about trees and green. And then I think the third one there, I would say, is underground. It's a complete chaos underground, as you also know, Sharon, and there's now initiatives to start clustering cables. Amsterdam now has an underground infrastructure planner who actually brings it all together and looks at how can we optimize space, for example, for trees and cables, and also the discussion with the engineers and with the utility companies, and so to see how we can do things better. The great example is, of course, that trees over asphalt can help prolong the durability of the asphalt, which actually is a cost saver. So, and we always talk about cracking the root being cracking up or pushing up the asphalt, but there's also benefits of having a tree cover. So I think we have to have those discussions as well.
Yeah, fascinating. And you talk about Utrecht, and I love Utrecht. I'll come on to that in a minute. But Dirk, do you have anything to add to that retrofitting?
Well, unfortunately, Cecil stole most of my points.
Oh,
sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
No, but the energy transition is, of course, very important. I mean, we'll need to dig up everything anyway. Yeah. Why not do it smart? Put all the cables and pipes and sewer systems on one side of the street and plant trees on the other one. We're now opening up everything anyway. Why not abuse that? And abused, it sounds horrible. Use that. Apply that for the good. There's a lot that can be done, and there's a lot of pushing from the health sector. And I like what you said. Actually, there was also an example that I wanted to make, but don't worry, it's fine.
Well, this is when you have two experts together, you're going to have
there you go.
ideas.
This is what happens, huh? Yeah. But the fine particle matter that comes from asphalt roads, because of all the UV light on the streets. I mean, if you can avoid that and just reduce the amount of fine particle matter in the air, by using trees don't just they provide the shade to make sure that the asphalt roads are not degrading, and that saves lives. That's fantastic. So
absolutely, it's about joined up thinking. We know that everything's connected, but all of this takes money, and so where is the money coming from? And I think that we need fresh ways of thinking. So there is a time of money in municipalities is quite scarce, and so it's got to be funded. And what mechanism can it be funded? And I think we could look towards an era where some of our guests have talked about carbon tax in the future. Could that be used for this? We have biodiversity net gain credits. That's very much about creating these nature havens, but I wonder if all sorts of other innovations could come about financially to join together to really drive that. I mean, what are your thoughts on new ways of funding this?
Yeah, I think the basic problem is that the market doesn't work properly in this case, right? So we see the benefits of trees and green are generated, but they fall not to the people planning, designing, and managing the green. So they go to the developers, or they go to those who are selling the houses. They go maybe even to utilities, or like saving energy costs, etc. So I think we need to get those mechanisms better, and that includes also health benefits. So can we find ways of channeling some of the funding for utilities, for stormwater regulation, for health, back into the green space planning and management system, and especially the management part, right? Where we see, as you also said, Sharon, right, that budgets are decreasing rather than increasing. So I think it's an economic failure that we have to address, and we have to find ways of, making sure that it's done more properly, so that the benefits and costs are fairly distributed.
Yeah. Dirk?
True. And then I think it's important to remember that we're in this for the long run, right? I mean, we may be 3% away from perfection. If we spread out those 3% over the next 30 years, then the cost of gaining those 3% are nothing. Yeah, so we're in this for the long run. Probably we need to open up the streets anyway at some point if we do it smarter at that particular time, and we'll reach the 300 rule before you know it.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, you think about the 300. Well, Luke Fay interviewed me a few weeks ago and asked me, what would my top 30 things using your rule would I want to change in the culture? And I wonder if, and this is just amusing really, does it take just free impassioned people who want to deliver this change? That's us three here right now, trying to reach 30 people with this message. Well, that's way less than the audience of this podcast. So I say to the listeners, if you love what you're hearing, can you at least speak to 3 other people, or send a link to this episode to 3 other people? And those who really care will work in industry to try and reach 30 other people. It's like the ripple in a pond, isn't it? Say decision makers, non-tree professionals, community groups, to talk about this idea, because it's the power of ideas. This is sort of the power of your idea, isn't it? To affect a change for people, place, and planet. So have you got any examples of like somebody that perhaps you weren't expecting to really grab hold of this idea and just like run with it?
Yeah, that makes me think also of the average classroom size that we've had in long time is of 30 people, right? And spreading the idea from there. Yeah, for sure. I think the idea of spreading the word through, multiplying, even talking with your neighbors or your family members or your children is already very powerful. I had a very nice experience a few weeks ago when I was at a conference in Sweden, and the guy who was doing the sound and the light, and so he came up to me. He said, "Actually, I knew your rule already in the end of 2021 because my daughter heard about it when they were doing a school project, and they presented it to the city council in a very kind of youth parliament session." So that kind of gave me hope that this is something that different people can pick up and use, and the word will spread pretty rapidly.
Love that. Dirk, what are your thoughts? You met anybody that you thought, well, they won't have heard of this, but they're trying to blaze a trail?
Well, I've got nothing much to add, I suppose. I mean, it's a good story. Everybody understands it, so it's easy to spread the word, I would say. And of course, this podcast yet again helps at that quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm really pleased with the way. I'm delighted with how the community's going. So, Cecil, take us for a walk now through a city in 2060 where the 300 rule was adopted in the early 2022. Tell us about your walk through that city.
Yeah, so this time, I mean, my home is pretty warm, but when I step out on a hot summer day, it's cool and it's shady because the trees are there. I have my doorstep trees, I have my street wood, I can walk along it, and I hear people talking, children playing. my neighbors are there. I make a little chat under the canopy of a nice big tree. And then I make my way to the local urban grove where I celebrate being part of my community. I take a moment to spiritually refresh myself before I go into work. And I realize that green and nature are all around us, and it's something that we don't take for given. We do acknowledge those trees and nature, but we're also celebrating that and realizing that we did go the right way, and 330-300 helped with that.
Wow, that's what we want. People thriving, nature thriving, and our planet healing.
One of the cities that comes to mind is Arnhem in the Netherlands, and especially the 300 rule part. They were facing, they have this neighborhood built around 1900. There's very little public space there, but they've got all these inner courtyards that they've turned into green parks. But none of them reaches the 1 hectare, basically. So they're all too small, but there's many of them. And there were big discussions about it. Now we don't reach the 300 rule, so everybody will hate us. And other people, no, we can count this as one park because all these things together are one park, and we shouldn't worry about it. And ultimately, what came out was, well, at least we're having this discussion now for the first time in our lives. It's the first time that we actually discuss if this is acceptable or not. We always took it for granted, or we never really bothered. But now, for the first time, we can have a proper discussion about, okay, how do we feel about this part? And that was the true added value that they got out of the 330-300 rule, except for there were also some other things. But this was really something that struck my mind. I thought, yeah, that's really lovely in the sense that finally you can have something to discuss among a group of people.
And I also really love the fact that on your website, Dirk, you talk about green-blue veins and the power of blue space as well. And I know we're moving we are moving away now from the rule. But I just want to speak to that at the moment because my daughter is studied the power of blue space on our well-being as well. And actually, controversially to this podcast, there are some that say the restorative power of seeing or being near water is better than trees. But it isn't so easy to create a new blue space as it is to plant a tree. But I just wondered about the synergy between green and blue space together and what you found in your work, Dirk, with these youthfully named green veins and symbols.
Yeah, there should be synergies, right? I mean, if you want to cool down your city, of course, trees help a lot, but so do fountains. So adding water to your cities is really a fantastic asset. Combining these two, ideally, yes, you can combine these two. Yet it's yet again another space absorber but it really adds benefit to your cities. So the combination is of course the best. It's not necessarily part of the 330-300 rule, but can't deny that having both green and blue, that makes for lovely cities.
And I think the more that we celebrate the interconnectedness of nature and all things and people, the stronger the argument becomes. And just thinking at a very simplistic level at a new development requiring sustainable urban drainage systems and how that can be delivered by these sort of shallow water bodies. They are getting better, they're less engineered in terms of their appearance, but trees are part of that too, aren't they? So we can be delivering the 300, we can be delivering sustainable urban drainage and blue space appreciation as well. So, there's so much to celebrate and to bring together. And what I really love about both of your work is the way that you bring together so many different disciplines, GIS and mapping and social science, health science, physical geography, social geography, urban forestry. It's a real celebration of that. So I just think it's genius. I think one of the and I don't use that lightly, and I don't use that word very often on the podcast, to have something that has captured a school child's imagination, that has been on a TED Talk, but that has spread across the world in a way that has changing minds and changing some hearts and definitely changing practice. I think that's something to really celebrate. So I am so grateful for both of your time. I'm grateful to you, Cecil Konijnendijk and Dirk Voets. How brilliant to hear how you're using this rule, how you've really analysed this. And now, listeners, it's over to you. I would really love you to share this episode with somebody that you know who doesn't work with trees, maybe a city planner, maybe a teacher, maybe somebody, a neighbour who cares about the environment, because we all have a responsibility to make a difference to people, place and planet. And this episode, this movement is incredibly powerful. So thank you both for your time.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Sharon. It was a pleasure.